Our group did the Decade Project on the 1950s. We're going to start with the top 10 U.S. history facts. The first U.S. history fact was the Korean War. It was a war between North and South Korea. The United States fought for the South and China fought for the North. It lasted from 1950 to 1953. An armistice was signed. It created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, which separates North and South Korea, and allowed to return prisoners. However, no lasting peace treaty has been signed, and they're still technically at war. The next fact is Dwight D. Eisenhower being elected in 1952. He won by a landslide, and he ended the string of Democratic wins that stretched back to 1932. He won 442 electoral votes, and his opponent only won 89. My next fact is Brown versus Board of Education. It was in 1954. It was a United States Supreme Court case in which the court declared state laws establishing separate public schools for black and white students to be unconstitutional. This paved the way for integration, and it was a major victory of the civil rights movement. The next fact is the Mutual Security Act. It was launched in 1951, and its main goal was to help poor countries develop and to contain the spread of communism. It was signed October 10th, 1951 by President Harry S. Truman, and it replaced the Marshall Plan. Annual authorizations were about $7.5 billion out of $340 billion in 1951 for military, economic, and technical foreign aid to American allies. Another U.S. history event was the Montgomery bus boycott. It was a social and political protest campaign against racial segregation and the public transport system of Montgomery, Alabama. It lasted from December 1st, 1955 to December 20th, 1956. It ended when segregated buses were considered unconstitutional. The next fact is the National Defense Education Act. It was signed into law on September 2nd, 1958, providing funding to the United States education institutions at all levels. It was among many science initiatives implemented by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1958 to increase the technological sophistication and power of the United States alongside NASA. The next event was the ratifying of the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Congress passed the amendment on March 21st, 1947, and it was ratified on February 27, 1951. It stated that no president could be elected more than twice. The only two states that rejected the amendment were Oklahoma and Massachusetts. The next event is the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. It was popularly known as the National Interstate and Defensive Highways Act. It was enacted on June 29, 1956, when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the bill into law. It had an original authorization of $25 billion of the construction of 41,000 miles of the interstate highway system, supposedly over a 10-year period. It was the largest public works project in American history throughout that time. The reason it had defense in its name is because some of the original costs diverted from defense funds, and most of the U.S. Air Force bases have a direct link to the system. The next event is Hawaii joining the United States. It joined August 21st, 1959. It's the only state located in Oceania and is the only one composed of entirely islands. It is the northmost island group in Polynesia, occupying most of the archipelago in the Central Pacific Ocean. Hawaii is the only U.S. state not located in the Americas, and they don't observe daylight savings time. Hawaii became a territory of the United States in 1898, and it was admitted as a state in 1959. The next event is Alaska becoming a state. Starting in the 1890s and stretching in some places to the early 1910s, gold rushes in Alaska and the nearby Yukon Territory brought thousands of miners and settlers to Alaska. Alaska was officially incorporated as an organized territory in 1912 due to all the miners. The statehood of Alaska was approved by Congress on July 7th, 1958, and Alaska was officially proclaimed a state on January 3rd, 1959.
So in the 1950s, music was a huge source of entertainment for like mostly teens and stuff. But and with the music, they loved to dance, and they were really unhappy when schools didn't hold dances. So they would bend the rules and hold their own dances at fraternities and wherever else that they could. One of the most popular musicians that they danced to was Elvis Presley. He was really well known for his very upbeat rock and roll style that was very free and was loved by rebellious teens. They thought it was great music to dance to, and they really enjoyed listening to him. The parents, on the other hand, loathed people like Elvis Presley because they were listening to artists like Frank Sinatra, which was really big into jazz. So some churches even considered rock and roll Satan's music. When teens weren't out dancing or listening to music, they would often meet up at ice cream parlors, malt shops, pizza parlors, or coffee shops, and these were like the social hotspots of interaction. And teens had a lot of fun hanging out there, and it's similar today in the sense that a lot of teens like to meet up at fast food places for lunch or just to hang out. Another thing that hasn't really changed with teens over time is the tradition of going to the movies. Nowadays, we go actually inside a movie theater and sit down, while back then people would go to drive-in theaters where there's a huge projector that projected a movie onto a huge screen, and you sat in your car in like a huge parking lot and watched the movie. And they really loved it because it was a great place to go to be without their parents and to be rebellious and stuff. Many teens would also meet up at a ice rink. People would commonly have their birthday parties there, and they really enjoyed skating around for a few hours, usually during the winter, but also at other warmer times of the year up in the northern states. Disneyland, a place that we all know and love, opened up in 1955 in Anaheim, California. It was actually the only Disney park to be built under direct supervision of Walter Disney himself, because he died not too much later in 1960 or so. And it consisted of 5 uniquely different lands: Main Street USA, Frontierland, Adventureland, Tomorrowland, and Fantasyland. TV in the 1950s was very popular among everyone. Almost everyone who could afford one had one, much like today. The highest rated show back then was I Love Lucy, and a very famous quote from it is "Honey, I'm home," and we still hear that a lot today. And another show was Twilight Zone, which was especially popular among teens, which they love the mysterious plot lines. Another very popular TV show among younger children was Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. It was related to Disneyland, and because Disneyland had just recently come out, it was very popular among all ages. Another common pastime back then was more popular among older teens, especially guys, was to work on their cars. People took a lot more pride than they do nowadays in their cars, and older teens would often be seen spending loads of their time working on their car and trying to keep it in pristine condition. For younger children who didn't have cars to work on, you would see them most of the time playing with their toys. The toys that they played with, most are still very popular today, included hula hoops, Barbie dolls, and electric trains. The trains being the small type that you would set the tracks up like around the Christmas tree or something. One final revolutionary source of entertainment in the 1950s was Playboy. The first issue of it was in 1953, and it really changed the public's view on sex and what some people consider negative and what some people consider positive way. The well-known rabbit logo was chosen because of its humorous connotation to being frisky and playful.
Our next topic is top 10 fashion and pop culture in the 1950s. First was the Beatniks. They were urban literary intellectuals who wrote and performed, and they encouraged people to freely express their individual beliefs and desires. Our next fact is drive-in theaters. It was a combination of the American car culture and the renewed popularity of the movies. They appealed to a range of viewers, and you could get a group of friends into one car and you could see the movie at a discount. But they eventually fell out of favor as indoor theaters grew in size. About 500 drive-ins still remain today. My next pop culture fact is the gelatin molds. They became very popular in the 1950s. It takes the shape of any container it's poured into, which made it a simple and popular food. People wishing to throw a party could simply add fruit, nuts, or even meat to the gelatin to make it a delicious side or dessert. My next fact is the David Crockett inspired coonskin caps. As the popularity of television and movies grew, so did the urge to follow them. Coonskin cap sales skyrocketed as a result of David Crockett from the Frontierland TV series. The series was broadcasted on Walt Disney Wonderful Land of Color. Over $100 million worth of coonskin caps were sold during this time. My next pop culture fact was soda fountains. These were restaurants that were often found in the corner of drugstores, and they served soft drinks, ice cream, and other simple foods. Some would contain a bar area where customers, often teenagers, would be served. They were good hangout spots for people, but became less popular when drive-in restaurants came along.
Fashion really changed in the 1950s with the explosion of rock and roll. Dancers wanted non-restrictive clothing that would allow them to move freely to the beat. The poodle skirt came from that, and it was a very colorful and loose skirt that typically hit just below the knee, and often had an image of a poodle on it. They were great for dancing, and that's why they became popular. Girls would wear the poodle skirts to a typical high school dance in the 1950s. A typical high school dance was an informal, school chaperoned event in which teens removed their shoes and danced in their socks to protect the gymnasium floor. These were nicknamed sock hops, and these dances proved to be very different from the dances of the older generations, which complied more of very strict and formal dancing with no, free movement or anything. Some of the most popular dances among hops included the hand jive, the stroll, and the box step, and most importantly, the twist. Although the twist came a little late to the party, originating in 1959, it was made famous in 1960 by Chubby Checker. Chubby Checker proved to be a star maker, and he starred in multiple twist-themed movies and got a Grammy for multiple songs. In the 1950s, the film industry was beginning to lose their audience with television programs taking people away from the theaters at an alarming rate. What they did to fix this was start using 3D movies. This created a huge boom, and everybody started going to the movie theaters. But unfortunately, after there were 5,000 theaters in the United States equipped to show 3D movies, the fad went flat because people complained of their eyes being strained. The fad has now returned, though, with better technology. The conical bra was another odd fashion of the 1950s, which was like a pointy push-up bra of their decade.
1950s World History Timeline. Number 1. Moscow announces explosion of hydrogen bomb. In 1953, the Soviets successfully tested their first hydrogen bomb. The hydrogen bomb was roughly 26 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. Although this bomb wasn't nearly as powerful as the one made 9 months before by the Americans, one major advantage that it still was usable as a weapon. The bomb was still small enough to be dropped from an airplane. The design consisted of hydrogen fuel and uranium. Number 2. Polio vaccine created. On March 26, 1953, Salk had announced that he had successfully made a vaccine that could fight polio. Polio is a virus that can cause paralysis. but today may be treated by the polio vaccine. Polio cannot be cured, but treatment may help. It took years of testing before Salk actually got the vaccine to kill off the virus. Polio spreads through contaminated food or water. Polio is commonly found in children. Number 3. Fidel Castro becomes dictator of Cuba. On February 16, 1959, Fidel Castro becomes Prime Minister of Cuba after leading a guerrilla campaign. When Castro became dictator of Cuba, he made his country a communist government. A communist government is a system of government which the state controls the economy. Castro ruled over Cuba for 5 decades. In 2008, Castro handed off his power to his younger brother. To gain power, Castro led an overthrow of military dictatorship of Batista in 1959. In 1958, Chinese leader Mao Zedong launches the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was a social campaign ran by the Communist Party of China. It lasted from 1958 to 1961. The Great Leap Forward was known as a disaster. The number of deaths recorded in the Great Leap Forward was between 20 and 43 million. During the Great Leap Forward, many people died of different reasons. A lot of labor took place during the Great Leap Forward to produce more steel and crops. Number 5. Hungarian Revolution. The Hungarian Revolution was also known as the Hungarian Uprising. The revolution was a revolt against the government and its Soviet-placed policies. The revolution lasted from the 23rd of October to the 10th of November in the year of 1956. When the revolution first started, it was leaderless. This made it a major threat to the Soviet control. This all resulted in a victory for the Soviets, 700 Soviets dead, and more than 2,500 Hungarian citizens dead. Number 6. In 1957, the Soviet satellite Sputnik introduces the space age. Sputnik was the size of a beach ball and weighed only 183.9 pounds. It took Sputnik 1 hour and 38 minutes to orbit Earth. The launch of Sputnik had a huge impact because not only did it introduce the space age, it also showed the U.S. what the Soviets were capable of. U.S. citizens feared that the Soviets would use their knowledge to make a missile that could travel to the U.S. Satellites were invented to map an image of the Earth. Number 7. In 1958, the peace symbol was created. The peace symbol was created on February 21st, 1958. The creator of the peace symbol goes by the name of Gerald Herbert Holton. The symbol was made by a campaign that Holton was in for nuclear disarmament. Many people used many different forms of peace symbols back then. Some examples of peace symbols that were used back then are doves and olive branches that were used by early Christians as peace symbols. Number 8. The Korean War. The Korean War was a war between North and South Korea. United Nations, led by the United States, assisted the South in the war. The Chinese and the Soviet Union helped the North during the war. War broke out when North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union invaded the South on June 25, 1950. The fighting ended on July 27, 1953, when an armistice was signed. The agreement separated North and South Korea. The agreement also allowed any prisoners to return home. Number 9. Pakistan becomes an Islamic Republic. Pakistan was the first country to become an Islamic Republic and adapt to it in 1956. Pakistan only uses the Islamic name on passports and coins. The president of Pakistan during the change was President Muhammad Ayub Khan. An Islamic Republic is a name that is given to a country that are ruled by Islamic laws. Number 10. The Soviet Union's unmanned Luna 2 rocket reaches the moon. The unmanned spacecraft was the second rocket launched to the moon by the Soviet Union. The Luna 2 spacecraft was actually the first to hit the moon. The Luna 2 weighed about 160 pounds. The launch date for the Luna 2 was September 12, 1959. The rocket took a direct path to the moon, leaving it with a 36-hour trip. This was Russia's 6th attempt on getting a rocket to the moon. The first 3 failed to take off, and Luna 1 flew right past the moon.